Good evening and welcome. My name is Tom Ginsberg. I'm the Leo Spitz Professor of International Law at the University of Chicago. And I want to thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion. We welcome viewers who join us via YouTube for our conversation on democracy and what we can learn from Poland's recent history. Poland and the United States have some very similar challenges in their politics and in their constitutional structures. Both have been highly polarized in recent years. Both have seen attacks on institutions, changes to fundamental institutions. And we're very lucky tonight to be able to learn from Adam Bodnar, the Minister of Justice of Poland and a lawyer specializing in constitutional law and human rights. He previously served for several years as Poland's Commissioner for Human Rights, which is colloquially known as the Ombudsman position in Poland, and as president of the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Throughout his career, he's worked with organizations like the European Institute for Gender Equality, the UN Voluntary Fund for Victims of Torture, and the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. And he's received several awards in recognition of his important contributions, including the 2018 RAFTO Prize and the 2019 prize from the World Justice Project for the Rule of Law Award. Tonight's program is a partnership between the Chicago Council and the World Justice Project, which is a global multidisciplinary organization working to advance the rule of law worldwide through rigorous data and research and support for a global stakeholder network. The WJP would like to thank the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, the Jones Day Foundation, the Microsoft Corporation, the Newcomb Family Foundation, and the Proteus Fund for their support for tonight's program. We'll start off with a chat between myself and the minister, after which we will have Q&A with our online audience. And so for those of you following online, if you have a question for the minister at any time, you can go to ccga.live, that's ccga.live, and submit your question there, and we will come to them after our initial conversation. I want to remind everyone that tonight's program is on the record, and any views expressed by either of us here at the Council are our own and do not reflect any institutional positions. So with that introduction, welcome, Adam. It's great to see you again. So happy to be here with you.
Hello, good to see you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for making this show.
Wonderful. You know, Poland has been a case which scholars have talked about as one of the central examples of a democracy that's been at some risk in recent years. Backsliding is the term that we sometimes give. Some of us talk about the United States in similar terms. And I wonder if you might begin by talking about some of the developments in Poland's recent history which have led to this characterization.
First of all, I would like to thank World Justice Project for being here. I'm here because of the conference that has been organized by Elizabeth Anderson from World Justice Project, which is so-called World Justice Challenge, where different people from different continents and countries presented their challenge, the way how to overcome some rule of law challenges and crises in their countries. And Poland is one of those countries. Please note that we are, after '89, we are in the process of continuous transformation. So after '89, Poland joined the European Union, NATO, Council of Europe. We have gone through the deep economic transformation and democratic and constitutional transformation. But in 2015, we started to have democracy crisis and the rule of law crisis, because the party that is named Law and Justice, headed by Mr. Kaczyński, started to implement different reforms aiming towards limiting the capability and independence of different state institutions, especially courts, but not only, also public media, civil service, secret services, prosecutors' office. And this process of limiting independence of institutions, which is named sometimes as this process of creating so-called illiberal democracy, lasted until 2023. So we had 8 years of erosion of democratic standards. But fortunately, there were elections that looked a little bit like the plebiscite in October 2023, and those elections have been won by the democratic opposition, by 4 political parties that created later on a government that is right now ruling Poland and that is trying to overcome the crisis, that is trying to repair Poland's situation. So basically, I'm in this government. I'm responsible for the rule of law and judicial reform.
Let's talk a little bit about the courts, because if I remember, what happened is the prior government had, appointed some constitutional court justices rather late, and then the Law and Justice Party came in and set aside those appointments, and led to a really grave situation in terms of was the judges that were on the court legitimate or not? I wonder if you could describe a little bit about that rule of law crisis, specifically with the Constitutional Court.
Yes, that's true that in 2015 there was a problem with the judicial appointees to the Polish Constitutional Court. In fact, the government, the ruling majority in 2015, I would say, exceeded the limit of possible nominations. So they have appointed not only 3 judges, but 5 judges, kind of predicting that the term of some judges is coming to an end. But interestingly, the Justice Party has used this opportunity to undermine not only appointment of 2 judges, but all five of them. So as a result, it was possible for the Law and Justice to introduce some new members of the Constitutional Court. Some of them were introduced in a way that was contrary to the Constitution. So some of those judges have been named as so-called double judges. But basically, by the end of 2016, the judges that were more or less loyal to the new ruling party created a majority in the Constitutional Court. So the Constitutional Court has been captured as the institution, and in fact it is captured until today. So it is not providing any proper judicial review. Moreover, there were some moments when the Constitutional Court was delivering judgments that were simply serving some political purposes. So it has been instrumentalized to achieve some specific political purposes. So it was a little bit like this. What happened in 2015 was a little bit like the primary scene, and on the basis of this scene, further changes have been created to the legal system, including some changes in different state institutions.
I suppose it makes it today, this moment, one of extraordinary delicacy, because you have these sitting institutions, maybe the members were appointed illegitimately, but to simply vacate them would invite a retaliation in the next period and such. So how do you think about reforming institutions after what we might call a near miss in democratic backsliding? How do you think about how to get them back to doing their proper jobs?
That is true. That please note that this process of building this illiberal system has lasted for 8 years. So it was not only about Constitutional Court. It was about prosecution service. It was about judicial appointments to regular courts. It was about such an institution which is called National Council of Judiciary, responsible for judicial appointments. It had also impact on public media as well as on secret services. So basically, please imagine that after elections that took place in October 2023, you land in a country in which a number of institutions have been eroded or taken over politically and I would say strategically. So now, and moreover, when the new government is formed, this government is having a parliamentary majority, but not even a majority to overturn the veto of president, not mentioning a possibility to change the constitution. So we are a little bit like in this kind of a transition period in which there are some possibilities to change things using executive power or at least using existing legislation. But in fact, in order to make like a proper, deeper change, you would require cooperation with at least president of the Republic of Poland. And we are going to have presidential elections next year in May. So until that time, we are able to do certain changes to the Polish legal system, but still those chances to make proper things are quite limited. So that is a little bit like not a little bit, it is a challenge on a daily basis, how to reform a country when your hands are tied, when you do not have all the operational possibilities that would be typical when you are trying to get out of that kind of a problem.
So in other words, it's a critical election from your point of view in the sense of being able to repair institutions.
Certainly, these are critical elections because without consent and cooperation with the president, you cannot ultimately change the legislation. And for president, for example, one of the most important, for the current president, one of the most important points is the process of judicial nominations. So basically, after 2018, there were a number of flawed judicial nominations. Those nominations have been questioned by European courts, Court of Justice of the EU, which serves a little bit like the supranational authority for Polish courts, and by the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So you have all those judgments. You have to change legislation in order to repair the situation, but then president comes and says, sorry, but I think that all the nominations I did over last years are correct from the point of view of constitution, and please do not bother me with questioning those nominations. So you must wait until the new president comes in order to repair the situation. And it is just one of many problems that appear here.
I suppose another related problem is you have many judgments that were issued by these courts in which ordinary people are relying for their, contracts and things like that. So, I suppose there's a problem of reversing legal certainty if you were to try to undo those judgments.
It's true, but I think there is like a general agreement that as long as those new judges, we name them neo-judges, do not exercise their power in abusive way, as you do not have any proof that they have been somehow like politically manipulated in doing some judgments, those judgments should stay. But still, if you make something like a vetting of those judges, because that is the reform that is expected to happen. I'm responsible for preparation of this reform. Of course, there will be a question: what happens with validity of those judgments? So I claim that they should stay, unless you are able to show some specific facts that may indicate that you should reopen proceeding, because otherwise the whole justice system would collapse if you would allow for reopening of all those cases. Like, if we sit here, every day there are, hundreds of judges that are issuing those judgments. So it is quite impossible to overturn them later on as a result of this vetting of judges.
One of the things that's been interesting in watching the Polish situation from afar is the discourse about this. So one of the arguments that was made by the Law and Justice Party was that the judiciary was full of communists because there had never been vetting back in the early 90s, that it had been institutional. There was insufficient cleaning. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that for our audience, because when I hear that, I have no idea what they're talking about. It strikes me as like an epithet, just an insult they're throwing. But what's the source of that, the power of that argument, and why do they make it?
It's quite interesting because there is, in fact, one scholar from the University of Chicago who has written a book about this, Monika Nalepa. So she has devoted like her whole book to settlements with the past of the Polish judiciary. And in fact, she's one of those authors who is making that kind of an argument that maybe lack of like a proper settlement with the past, with the communist past, is one of the reasons for what happens in Poland. The fact is that in 1989, we didn't have like a proper vetting of judges. So there was this kind of idea that the judiciary would clean itself out of the people that were somehow participating in the communist system. It happened, but only partially. So there was no like a systemic effort to do it. So, for example, there was a great book by the first president of the Supreme Court, Adam Bodnar, who has the book was entitled Judges Under Pressure and Their Position in the Communist Times. So he has presented some, let's say, names on the basis of name and shaming. And on the basis of this, and this book was one of the elements of creating this kind of a pressure of people leaving judiciary. And many of them left judiciary, but still there were some individual people that were still there. So when the Law and Justice made this argument, there was some truth in this argument, but it was only a very, very limited truth, because in fact, majority of judges, and especially those ones who were attacked by the Law and Justice, were in the age of, let's say, 45, 50. So they didn't have any chance by virtue of their age to have anything in common with the communist times. Maybe the only thing they had in common that they were, that maybe they received some, nice packages from their aunts and uncles from the United States during communist times. That was there because they were just kids, during this time, like I was. I was the kid during that time, but they didn't have any cooperation with the communist regime. But please note, it was a very eloquent argument to use in international discussions, because if you go internationally, if you go to some countries that are criticizing Poland, and there is some of let's say deputy ministers of justice who are saying it is everything in order to get rid of communists from the Polish judiciary, people don't have this knowledge what is really happening, so it is quite difficult to argue. So this argument has been instrumentalized. The whole purpose of changes in the judiciary was to take over control over judiciary and to create a system of lack of accountability for any abuses of power. That was the purpose of making this change, and different arguments have been used at different stages to justify those judicial reforms.
It's interesting because this is one of these things which we share with Poland, the politicization of the judiciary and attempts to change the normal rules of appointment. Obviously, we've experienced that in the last few years with the Supreme Court. I suppose one difference between the United States and Poland is that you are embedded in this European legal order. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that European legal order insulated you maybe from the worst situation, or how it sort of supported the autonomy of institutions surviving during this period. And I would also ask, because you were, of course, in the government under that period as the ombudsman, how did Europe work for you guys?
Just one thing, being the ombudsman, you are totally independent, okay? Yeah. So you cannot say that you are in the government. Quite otherwise, you are like one of those checks and balances institutions, which is separate from parliament, government, judiciary. You are like this kind of a spider that is above all those different institutions, and you are interacting with them, and your only accountability is to the parliament, that you must report every year to the parliament, and to great extent it is extremely difficult to dismiss you from the position. So it is quite it's very well known institution globally. But I would say like the Polish type of the ombudsman institution is very strong in terms of constitutional design and authority. So when I was the ombudsman, I could basically react to all those different changes. I could comment on them. I could intervene in court proceedings. I could make statements, speeches in the parliament. I could even participate in litigation of different cases before international bodies. So I was one of those let's say last remaining guardians of the constitutional order, and I used all my possibilities in order to fight for the rule of law at that time. But you are right that this situation of connecting Polish legal system with the EU law is quite specific, and it was one of those barriers of creating like the full authoritarian regime in Poland. So please look that being a member of the EU means that we have this so-called system of multi-level governance. Okay, some people say, it's almost like a federalism, but it is not, of course, because European Union is not a state. We say that it is the supranational organization. But in practice, what the Court of Justice of the EU is doing, which is kind of a Supreme Court for the EU, is a little bit similar to the operation of the typical Supreme Court in the federal structure. So basically they say, the Court of Justice is saying that if a given state is violating the EU law, which is this supranational law, then the Court of Justice may give certain judgments, and then European Commission may impose certain penalties. European Commission, which is kind of a government for the European Union. And basically, there was a big question to what extent the Court of Justice of the EU may control different internal changes within judiciary of different member states. And at a certain point, the Court of Justice said, we respect your autonomy regarding how you construe your judiciary, whether you have, 1, 2, 3, 4 levels for level courts, whether those courts are named like this or in one way or the other. how you appoint judges and so on, but as long as this judiciary is independent from government. So that is what we are going to control, because if the judiciary is not independent from the government, it has also effect on the EU law, on the applicability of the EU law. And on the basis of this argumentation, there was the whole series of case law has been created and adjudicated concerning different Polish changes in the judiciary. So at the end of the day, those cases combined with political and legal pressure coming from the European Commission, I could say slowed down the process of changes in Poland. So at a certain point, we didn't have our own constitutional code, but we could rely on the jurisprudence of the Court of Justice of the EU, later on the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, which is like a completely different institutions in terms of showing that those changes that are happening in Poland are simply wrong from the point of view of EU law and international human rights standards.
Let's talk a little bit about this election last year. It was a critical election. As I understand, 74% of voters turned out, which is something Americans would be very jealous of, but also that young people came out in very high numbers. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about why the high turnout and why did young voters show up?
I think the major reason is that, first of all, there was a big expectation that the change is coming. That people are fed up with this period of not only attack on the rule of law, but also on certain values that are important to young people, especially equality and women's rights, but also environmental protection. These were those times that, like, kind of on a daily basis, you had some situations that you could not understand, some statements from politicians that were extremely aggressive, that were undermining belief in some typical values for the modern society. And I think it was possible during elections to convince young voters to go to vote and to show that some of those illiberal changes are affecting their rights. For example, women's rights, like access to legal abortion, or, for example, discourse on LGBT plus rights and restriction, I would say even hatred towards LGBT community, or the climate change issues. So there was a strong belief that the new government that is going to come is going to change situation here, not only from the perspective of the general discourse, but also in terms of shaping certain laws that are going to that have to be repaired after elections. So that is why there was such a huge turnout. And please note that before we had elections, there were two big demonstrations happening in Warsaw. One was on the 4th of June, which is quite a symbolic date for Poland, which is the anniversary of the first free elections in 1989. And there was a second demonstration on the 1st October. And, you know, depending how you count, but you may estimate that there were between 500,000, 1 million people participating in those demonstrations. So it was really massive. So you could feel that, you know, the change is coming, that the wind of change is blowing. There was such a song by Scorpions in '89, Wind of Change.
Yes. And of course, one of the issues that was getting people out, as you mentioned, was abortion.
Yep.
But that one, as I understand, would be very hard for your government to be able to reverse. It's a constitutional court decision.
Yes and no, because please look that this judgment of the Constitutional Court has been adopted on 22nd October 2020. And it is quite obvious that this judgment could be challenged from the point of view of legality. Because, for example, there were those so-called double judges in the Constitutional Court that were participating in this case. And second, the whole judgment has been issued as a kind of a political trick. So the Law and Justice Party did not want to get through the parliament with the changes in the legislation. They were afraid of protests at different legislative stages. So that's why there was a political decision to move the case to the Constitutional Court. And I think it was important because from that moment, people started to feel that this operation of the Constitutional Court is affecting their lives. It's not just about some general political issues, but that this court is having a power to change lives. And right now we are living in the situation that there is a political willingness to liberalize abortion laws in Poland. But there's another problem that coalition partners, so those parties that create a coalition, cannot agree on what should be in this law. And especially there is one party, which is called Polish Peasants Party, which is forming the government, which is kind of, Christian conservative. So I would say among Democrats, there is a discrepancy in views regarding abortion. So what happens at least is that, like, for example, my role in the government is that I'm the Attorney General at the same time. I'm in this quite a specific situation, using comparative experience, that I'm at the same time Minister of Justice and the Attorney General, okay? So, for example, next week I'm going to issue so-called general recommendations of the Attorney General how to prosecute cases concerning illegal abortion. And of course, I cannot change the law with those recommendations, but at least I can give some indications to prosecutors how they should behave, and maybe they should not use the law in a very heavy fashion, in a very restrictive way in that kind of situation. So you may alleviate consequences of this judgment with use of different, let's say, soft measures, and by changing also atmosphere around the problem. But still, the change of legislation is quite difficult to achieve.
Interesting. Another thing that observers noted, a sign of illiberalism, was these so-called LGBT free zones.
Yep.
That form part of Poland's local government initiatives. I wonder if you could describe that, and are those still in existence?
Fortunately, they are not. But there is one tricky issue with this notion, because they have been described as LGBT free zones, but these were just resolutions adopted by local city councils and local commune councils, saying that this community is free from so-called LGBT ideology, that in terms of education, cultural practices, they would not follow any practices that would kind of promote LGBT ideology. So these were just that kind of resolutions that sent a very bad signal. And they have been challenged by a number of actors. Quite interestingly, there were, I would say, two methods of challenging those LGBT resolutions. One of them was I used my power as the ombudsman to go to administrative courts and to say that if any local community is adopting that kind of a resolution, it is a legal act. It is not just a political declaration, and it should be subject of control by the administrative courts. And still, already, I think in 2021, I have won some of the cases before the Supreme Administrative Court concerning this. But there was another mechanism that was, I would say, even more powerful, which is so-called conditionality mechanism. And I think here, maybe we can come back to the European Union pressure. Because European Union is putting pressure not only in terms of giving judgments and saying, it is wrong, but European Union has created over the last couple of years so-called conditionality mechanism, which says, if you are not following basic EU values, like rule of law or like protection from discrimination, it means that we may cut you EU money. So it was applicable in the context of the judicial reform. So some money from the so-called EU post-COVID EU recovery fund has been suspended due to the problem with courts. But also it has been applied to local communities. So, for example, if there was a local community that wanted to build a swimming pool out of the EU money, they were saying, yes, okay, we could give you this money, but come on, we cannot give the money to the community which is adopting that kind of strange resolution. So, and then after a certain period of, after a couple of months of reflections, those communities adopted resolutions that, they are not any longer supporting that kind of a view that they have something against LGBT people. So that kind of a money pressure worked here, and this conditionality mechanism is like a little bit like the new invention in this relationship between the EU and member states.
So interesting, the European Union is sort of a backstop. On the other hand, this summer we saw the European Parliamentary elections, a big rise in the share of the right-wing populist parties, which might actually share some of the agenda with these local governments. So are you concerned at all about the trajectory of Europe in this regard?
We are concerned before elections. But at the end of the day, in Poland, elections have been won by civic coalition, by Donald Tusk and the coalition I represent. Interestingly, even my good friend Michał Wawrykiewicz, who was one of the major fighters for the rule of law, became MP. So I know that, in the LIBE committee, which is responsible for human rights, we have a very strong man there. But please note that Ursula von der Leyen is once again the president of the European Commission, and she says strongly that rule of law is a priority, that enlargement is a priority, and support to Ukraine is extremely important. So from this point of view, and she has secured quite stable majority in the Commission. Right now, we are waiting for the selection of the commissioners to the European Commission. So in my opinion, this agenda would be to great extent the same. But of course, there would be a pressure coming from different right-wing forces, and the forum of the European Parliament would be used in order to undermine some of the policies of the EU. We should be always careful about this. But in general, this general democratic direction of and the rule of law direction of the Commission did not change.
Now, looking back at the trajectory of the last 10 years now, what advice would you give those who are in countries who might be fearing that there's democratic backsliding about to occur? What signs would you look for? And I don't know if you have any ideas about what institutional solutions can be provided to ensure more resilience of democratic norms and the rule of law.
There is a very good book of our common friend Wojciech Sadurski, which is called Poland's Constitutional Breakdown. And this book ends with a chapter which is called Playbook for Autocrats. So he's kind of giving he's illustrating what strategies are implemented in different countries that are moving from democracy to illiberalism. And I remember well that when the process in Poland started, it was extremely useful for me to know what happened before in Hungary. So that was possible to predict what is like the next step. Okay, that if there is an attempt, if there is an attack on the Constitutional Court, then it is just the first step, and then the next step is our regular courts and public media and prosecution service, and that you are using different methods of disinformation. That basically that any autocrat that is not having constitutional majority would use this kind of a salami tactic in order to take over different institutions, and that would be a mix of institutional changes plus changes that create some called chilling effect on those that are in power. In Polish case, judges and prosecutors. So I think this book by Sadurski is, in my opinion, a little bit like the warning to anybody who is suffering, that autocrats do not stop in one place. They are just following with those reforms as long as they are not controlling fully the country. But of course, after those 8 painful years, we have a lot of experiences to share. So I think that the first experience is the role of the civil society. So it was extremely important that Polish civil society was strong, was active, was transforming the way of reaction. So when, for example, street protests were not enough, then it moved into strategic litigation, into different advocacy, transnational activities, just in order to inspire international actors to be active and not to forget about Poland. So supporting civil society, bar association, freedom of academia members is extremely important in this regard. Second, education on values, on constitution, on understanding by the general public why those values are important. And also kind of protecting institutions. There was this book by Timothy Snyder on tyranny, and there is the lesson number 2 he is giving is that you should protect institutions. You should take care. You should select, one of those institutions you would like to take care of. In this regard, of course, freedom of speech and taking care of free media, because you for example, for us, it was extremely important that the major television station is American-owned TVN station. Right now, it is Warner Bros. Discovery Discovery ownership, because there were some attempts to deprive the station of the license, but still, because of the, to be honest, American influence, this station kept the license, and it was possible to operate fully. So protecting institutions and media is extremely important. But I think there is like one important lesson, that we shouldn't take things for granted. We shouldn't think that people would understand how different judicial institutions operate, what is their role in the society, what is their value for the proper operation of the state. So this continuous awareness raising and this feeling that any institution can be taken over is extremely important in terms of protecting against this democratic backsliding.
It's a great suggestion. Of course, one of the features of our time is that institutions in general seem to be losing legitimacy. Even in our country, the Supreme Court, which is the most popular of the three branches, still is now below 50% in terms of public approval. And, you know, it seems like institutions generally are suffering. I want to ask you, as someone who was running an institution for all those years, how did you keep the Ombudsman's office, how did you keep your people motivated? How did you keep the integrity of the office given the pressures you were under?
I think maybe first answer is that by example, you know, by my full devotion to by leadership, that, you know, you should be strong and you should not see any, you should not show any weakness, and this strong attachment to values. So I think second, it should be always teamwork. So for me, it was like a really great thing that even if I've stopped to be the ombudsman, still there were my former colleagues that stayed there as in different key positions, and they could continue the work. And even right now, you know, I still cooperate with number of them. I'm really proud of that we could create like a really great community of lawyers in this institution. The third thing is communication, and I think that is something that I would like to pass as a message to courts. Of course, your Supreme Court has a great communication, but maybe it needs not critics these days. But maybe you should more appreciate what the Supreme Court did for American democracy for all those, you know, 200 years and more. You should maybe, you know, not forget about Brown versus Board of Education, or even, you know, Marbury versus Madison as part of your constitutional identity. And I know about all those recent cases, you know, I know how much you are critical towards them, but maybe you are fighting for something bigger, something that is lasting with your democracy for so many years. And you should not just orient you should not take the perspective of just, you know, a couple of last years, and maybe you should treat it more as a kind of a crisis situation that could be taken over, that could be cured somehow. But coming back to the ombudsman, it was important for me also to build legitimacy of the institution, but not by being involved not only in those, let's say, highly sensitive political cases, like the rule of law cases, LGBT cases, women's rights cases, but also to make all the time like the kind of a diversification of risk. So on the one hand, you are dealing with cases that are extremely important from the point of view of quality of democracy, but on the other hand, you are dealing with number of tiny cases concerning regular citizens, you know, abusive loans, environmental protection cases, labor cases, and so on, in order just to show to the people that they need you, that you are really for them. And I think that is something what institutions sometimes miss, that they are not just for their own existence, for their own prestige, for their own salaries, to be honest, also, but they are also like serving to citizens that they are serving citizens every day in every possible opportunity. So this kind of showing like the service to the people, I think, is extremely important in order to show credibility of a given institution.
It's great advice. Institutions should do what they were set up to do.
Exactly. Yeah, and should be also courageous enough to do it. Like, for example, right now we have a quite interesting discussion with the National Electoral Committee. So National Electoral Committee is reviewing the financial reports of political parties that were campaigning. And there is a huge accusation that the Law and Justice Party, so the previous ruling party was abusing state money in order to compete in elections, okay? And this National Electoral Council is having like a huge difficulty in making like a final decision in this case. And the big question is why? Is it about some, opportunistic choice, or is it really about serving to the people?
Last question. When you think about Poland today, what gives you the most hope?
I think that we know that we have a very important and strong position to play, not only for our people, but also for the whole European Union, because of the full-scale war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression. For me, sometimes we forget that we are facing the conflict which may lead, or which has already led towards building kind of a new Iron Curtain in Europe. Just look today. Today there was a situation about swap of prisoners and between Russia and the United States, with participation of a number of countries, including Poland. It is the story like from the movie with Tom Hanks, Bridge of Spies. And we see it right now. But I mentioned this because Poland, being democratic and being in a strong alliance with Germany and France, building so-called Weimar Triangle, maybe right now also with this indirect support of United Kingdom with the new Labour leadership, is strong in terms of, should be strong in terms of promoting values of liberal democracy and constitutionalism. And in strengthening European Union, also military capability and defense capability of European Union, and showing that democracy is the value in itself, and that democracy may serve to the people. And I see that that is what people expect. And of course, there are a number of problems in this transition period. We have a lot of problems with accountability processes. But still, I do believe that that we are serving like a bigger purpose these days than just repairing our democracy. That we should be strong because strength of the European Union depends on us.
Thank you. Well, for viewers at home, I want to remind you that you can ask questions at ccga.live, and we have a couple here, which I will ask. So the first, public media was also at the center of Poland's constitutional crisis. Could you explain a little more about what happened with the public media and what role public media should play in a democracy?
That's true. I know that in the United States, public media serve a little bit different purpose. That your media market is much more is divided into different, let's say, sections. But public media are a little bit like beyond like this traditional discussion, and they serve as a kind of a public community. Please note that in Poland, public media have a lot of coverage. Not only television, but especially radio stations. So in villages, rural areas, small cities, there is no such a huge coverage with cable TVs, but public media are much more present. So there was. So in 2016, the Law and Justice Party made a reform, as a result of which all the public media have been totally taken control. Moreover, it was not just about control, but also about having huge impact on the content. So sometimes if you watch like the major news program, which is called TVP Info, it was a little bit like a mixture of smear campaigns, hatred, governmental propaganda, and even once again, I will mention Wojciech Sadurski has compared Polish public media to Goebbelsian propaganda. He was sued by public media for defamatory statement, and then he won in court. Yeah. So court said, you were more or less right to make that kind of a comparison to the Goebbelsian media. So even I had some situations, quite many of them, when I was attacked using also some private issues from my life. And interestingly, the one of the most peculiar situations was such that once I've made a comment saying about a possible contribution of this negative narrative to one to the murder of the Polish mayor Paweł Adamowicz, and I was sued with the typical slap case for that kind of suggestion. I won the case in the court, but it was quite a strange situation that being the civil servant, ombudsman, I'm sued by the public television. Okay, so and surely public media had impact on the result of elections. So the recent OSCE report, which is monitoring the elections, made a clear suggestion that the public media had influence on the selection of the president, and it was serving one political party in the previous parliamentary elections. So right now the government has made some changes in the operation of the public media, but the change is such that right now they are not any longer any propaganda, but they are just on a daily basis building like the new. They're kind of coming back to the tradition before 2015. So, like for me, like the most important thing with public media is that if I go there, and from time to time I'm giving interviews, I have to prepare more or less like for one day, half a day, because I know the journalists are so much specific and demanding that there is no like a easy ball with them. So that is for me a sign of quality. Today even there was information that they start like the new section of investigative journalism in the public media. So basically this transformation is going because they should serve just general public, everybody. They should just supplement private media, and they should cover so-called public mission, which is all those events for which private media do not have money or sometimes resources, or that are not important from the point of view of like the commercial purpose, like different cultural events or even different sport events that cost a lot of money to make a proper coverage.
So as been mentioned, support for the U.S. Supreme Court has fallen to an all-time low, with the president formally proposing structural reforms right now. President Biden has proposed some changes. One of the ideas that scholars have put forward is 18-year term limits for, as you know, right now the just judges serve basically until death. And a constitutional amendment to overturn a recent opinion which granted extremely extensive presidential immunity that the Roberts Court just introduced. Do you think that those kind of reforms would introduce more trust in this situation, structural reforms?
So I think that right now I have to put my Minister of Justice hat and I think that, I'm not here as a scholar with you. So if we would meet in a different capacity, we can talk about it. But I think that, because it is the proposal by the current Biden administration, I should not express any view concerning this. Maybe once again, I would say that you should appreciate the role of your Supreme Court in creating the tradition of the judicial review.
So one of the interesting things we see in comparative studies of democratic backsliding is one of the challenges is that dominant parties are able to really divide the opposition. And this happened for a long time in Poland. Of course, the current ruling coalition was able to overcome that. And I guess the question is, how were they able to overcome their differences in order to actually have an effective electoral campaign? Was there a lot of compromise involved, and how is that hindering or helping governance now?
Thank you for this question. When I was studying, because, after being the ombudsman, I had this period of less than 2 years of being more into academia, into civil society. I have written a lot about the process of changes. And, one of the books that inspired me a lot was a book by Stephen Levitsky and Lucan Way about competitive authoritarianism. For me, it was, I'm not a political scientist, political science scholar. I'm a, constitutional scholar, international scholars, I was using usually traditional, legal handbooks. But at a certain point, I realized that in order to understand the situation, I have to read like this traditional stuff from political sciences. And in this book on competitive authoritarianism, they give like this one suggestion that it is possible to overcome the system of competitive authoritarianism if you are lucky enough. So if the opposition could be united, or if you have a strong leader that might be attractive enough for voters to vote on him. So even in my speeches, like from 2021, 2022, I was saying that we should have some kind of a Robert Lewandowski, who is this Polish football player in politics that would be able to win elections. And to be honest, we are lucky enough, as compared to Hungary, to have Donald Tusk, because Donald Tusk was a prime minister for 2 terms, between 2007 2014. Then he left to be the president of the European Council, but he had this, authority as the political leader in Europe and in Poland. So Hungary didn't have that kind of a guy, and he was able to kind of accommodate views of the majority of the opposition. He was able to create like the proper discourse with different NGOs, civil society movements, all those protectors of democracy. But at the same time, there was this, it was quite clear to everybody that all different political parties that are running separately, they would create a government afterwards. So people, even I remember that during one of the speeches, I think it was just 1 week before elections, Tusk made such a statement: "Listen, guys, if you do not like me because of some difficult memories from the past about me and my government, please vote at least for somebody else." But not for the law and justice, because these are opponents and not friends from other political parties that are going to promote democracy. And it was extremely important for voters that they had a choice. So this turnout, with having this choice between different political parties on the opposition side, created this momentum and this possibility to win elections. Mm-hmm. So that's why those parties got this majority in both chambers of parliament.
Mm. This question is about public education. What role can public education play when educational and legislative leaders unwittingly promote democratic backsliding? Mm. What's the role of public education? I try to think about what happened with the education over those last years. And for sure, what the previous government was doing was trying to restrict any form of, let's say, public influence on Polish schools. So, for example, NGOs were almost prohibited to enter schools and to have some trainings or classes on, equality issues, LGBT issues, or on constitution. So the constitution was like almost like a bad word to mention in schools. So right now, it's completely vice versa. Okay, so the schools are becoming open, and the new Minister of Education is trying to create different civic education programs. And I believe that it is fundamental to this rule of law recovery, that we should invest a lot of time and energy into modern, well-established programs of democratic education, programs of creating those new citizens that are aware what is the value of courts, what is the value of deliberation. And in here, I think US is a good example, because as far as I understand, you have those number of those practices of shaping this kind of a constitutional patriotism via schools and via public education. And you have all those different programs of sharing with pupils, with students, why the law matters, why is it important, not mentioning the tradition of debates in American schools. I would wish that we have the same in Polish schools, but we are, I would say, in the beginning of this road. So between 1989 and 2015, so even before the Law and Justice government came,
we kind of thought about schools as rather places to educate on, to create to pass the best knowledge from different subjects like maths, geography, physics, and so on, but not on passing democratic values. And I think right now, after these 8 years, we understand how important it is to build modern society.
Mm. One of the complaints that we sometimes get in the United States is that people vote and the government doesn't change or the policies don't change. Of course, we're a much larger country. We're much more, citizens are much more removed, obviously, from the national government. What can citizens do when they feel like voting isn't enough? How do you get people to overcome a sense that there's nothing they can do or the system is rigged against them somehow?
We have this discussions how much we should have direct and indirect democracy, and how much of so-called deliberative or participatory democracy in our systems. So from time to time, we have those politicians that are saying okay, this system of representation does not work. So maybe we should create referenda, so forms of direct democracy for all different problems, okay? And then, those politicians are promoting this vision, please look at Switzerland, they have all those referenda all the time and how good this country is. Okay, yes, but then it appears that if you go even in this direction, then it is almost impossible to attract voters to go to vote in those referenda. So it does not work really in a long-term perspective. But I think what is important is to give citizens a sense that that there are different forms of participating in democracy than just being voters. Even yesterday in Chicago, I don't know what was this protest about. We were just going from this Polish district, so-called Polish district, Jackowo, here in Chicago, and there was some protest of young people that were, fighting for some community space for them. That is democracy. They are just exercising their right to protest, or they create different kinds of associations by which they influence politics, or there are, you have this great tradition of being members of jury, which is also a form of participating in the third power adjudication. You are inspiration to a number of countries when it comes to the jury trials. You have different ways of creating different new methods of participatory democracy, like so-called citizens panels, citizens consultations on different issues. And I think that especially right now, when we have access to a number of new electronic instruments, we can use them more in order to shape our participation in democratic process that takes place on a daily basis and not just every couple of years when we have those big elections.
Adam, that's great advice for us. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come to what I understand is the world's second biggest Polish city. Yeah. So we're always happy to have you here. You're always welcome. Okay. And I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us for this session this evening. Again, on behalf of the Chicago Council and the World Justice Project, thanks very much and have a great evening.